And as I sat there, clear as day, Jim, these words came to my mind. And the words were, yield to overcome. Yield to overcome. And in that moment, what that meant to me, it wasn't about quitting or surrendering or giving up. It was about full acceptance. It's not about why me. What happened, happened. I didn't ask to have a chronic illness and to have to completely, reinvent myself. But the real question in that moment of yield to overcome is about acceptance. What is it that I can do right now with where I'm at to move forward?
My name is Jim Farley, and this is Drive. Yield to overcome. This idea of giving into things we cannot control to make way for a new path. Or in the case of my next guest, Colonel Nicole Malachowski, letting go of who she was. A United States Air Force officer, the first female pilot to be part of the Thunderbirds, the Air Force's elite flying squadron, to figure out what she would become next. So when I was a little kid, they called me Jimmy Car, and sometimes I wonder if it's weird that I'm running a car company. I love cars. And I read that you, at a very early age, you thought you would want to be a pilot at least. Well, so what's going on there? Because that's not normal.
I do recognize it's kind of unusual for someone to declare, their life's dream at 5 years old and have it come true. For me, I'll be honest, part of it was just maybe my personality. I became maniacally focused on this even at that very young age. And so I became very curious about what does it take, to become a fighter pilot.
Yep.
I wasn't the athlete growing up in elementary school or anything. I was, if you will, the academic or the nerd. And so I remembered going, well, how does someone, become a pilot? And that's where I learned, you needed to have a commission and a college degree. And so I started working towards that. That was my target. And I just started trying to figure out what the milestones were. I like to credit at age 12 joining an organization called the Civil Air Patrol. It's actually an auxiliary of the United States Air Force, and they have an extraordinary cadet program. And it was in that program that I took my first flying lessons. It was in that program where I learned about aerospace education and just patriotism and community service. But I think most importantly, I was able to surround myself with people who had similar dreams. And I think I was able to surround myself with people who believed in my dream as much as I do. And so I give a lot of credit to the Civil Air Patrol keeping me focused in junior high and high school.
So what'd you solo in?
I soloed an amazing Cessna 152. And it's super funny I'm talking to you right now, Jim, because about 5 minutes ago, my 14-year-old son put on his Civil Air Patrol uniform and just took off on his second flight with the Civil Air Patrol. As we speak, he is airborne right now.
All right. Well, that's a pretty amazing full circle moment for you. And do you like flying?
I love flying.
The actual experience of flying?
Oh, absolutely. I love the experience of flying. Now, let's be honest, there's different kinds of flying, right?
Of course.
I mean, when you're doing something like a combat mission where maybe the risk is a bit higher and maybe the mission planning and the execution's a bit more complicated, I don't know that sometimes I'm in the moment enjoying the flying as much as I am focused on the execution. But a lot of times if you're flying, in an air show as a Thunderbird, or maybe you're doing some training missions and maybe you have a moment to do some fun cloud chasing, I think those are those moments where you go, wow, look at the view and the perspective I have. Just the freedom and the grace and the power of being able to take to the skies can feel pretty darn good.
So where did that focus come from in your life? Because part of this podcast is called Drive. It's not just literally driving. It's like what makes people think, tick. I talked to Tom Brady, and I was shocked to find out that what really motivates him is the perfect pass. And for more than 3 decades, he's been working on throwing an American football perfectly. And that's why he loves golf, because he feels like he can feel the same way with a 7-iron. But each of us have different things that drive us. And it seems like from just listening to you for a few moments here, you're a very focused, very driven person. And that can come from our character and our surroundings, and usually both together. What's your story? What should people know about your focus? Where did it come from?
Sure, sure. I think change over time. When I think back to being a kid in elementary school or junior high with this really what other people considered a crazy dream, I think that's what drove me, right? This idea that not many people can become fighter pilots. It's considered something that's very elite. It's extraordinarily hard to do. You add on to that the fact that people looked at me and said, there's no way you're going to become a fighter pilot. It's too hard. You'll never be selected, let alone the fact that at that time it was actually against the law for women to become fighter pilots. And I think there was something as a kid that was very intriguing to me about doing something that people said I couldn't do. And then as you grow up and you gain experience, and you mature, as I started becoming, a young fighter pilot, that starts to transition, right? It's not so much that I needed the outside people telling me, hey, you can't do it. It became now a competition with myself. And it's a matter of what can I do to get better? I think fighter pilots in general are very competitive people, but contrary to popular belief, they're not necessarily competitive with each other. I think it's that competition within yourself. And the older and more experienced I got, I think especially as I started flying as an Air Force Thunderbird pilot, this mindset progressed into a question that I still ask myself every day, which is, what does it take to be a master of my craft? What can I do to become a master of my craft today? And, to the point that you use, is there ever a perfect football pass? Is there ever a perfect golf stroke? There's always a way to improve. And so I guess the mindset that drives me today is, what can I do to be a master of my craft? And ironically, that's not an aircraft anymore, right? It's speaking from the stage.
So what would you say to someone who wanted the same thing and didn't get it? And what is the other side of that focus and ambition that you've had to manage and deal with in your life?
Well, sure. There's always a flip side to every coin, right? And what people don't see when they look at folks who they perceive as being, highly successful, what they don't see, right, is all the work. What they don't see is the blood, the sweat, the tears. They don't see, the failures, the mistakes that happened along the way. And I think that's really what I would tell people. Success is not born when you get things right. Success is born when you have to move forward following a failure or a mistake or a misstep. For people that maybe had a dream, back to your original question, that, didn't come true, the question I would have for them is, what did you learn about yourself along the way? If you had a misstep or a mistake or you didn't achieve something, the real question is why? And have you really peeled back, the layers on that? I think people discover that as they go through these crucible experiences, it shapes who they are. And in fact, their goals may then change over time. Maybe they weren't supposed to necessarily be in that particular career field or achieving that particular dream, when through those hardships of trying, they may have even opened up other opportunities and discovered different strengths.
So it sounds like you really believe in the potential of everyone, that inside everyone, through a kind of process of being focused, having clear goals, learning from mistakes, and constantly adjusting, but never giving in to compromise in a way that all of us have the chance to have an impact on others.
Well, you said it a lot better and more succinctly than I did, Jim. And I'll tell you, I think one of the biggest keys to achieving, your personal success is having self-awareness. The awareness to go, okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are the gaps that I can go get more training on or mentoring on or garner more resources, for? And I think the other path to success, and, this is something that I do live by, is, what are your personal values? I find the people that can literally state the values that they aspire to achieve every single day in their life are the ones that can better navigate, when the turbulence and the change and the mistakes and failures inevitably come along. And oftentimes when I ask people, what are your values? They may list the values of their company or the organization or the team. And those are really important, especially for organizational culture, as you well know as the CEO at Ford. But what I'm talking about here is, what are your personal values? Maybe it's a commitment to yourself. Maybe it's those commitments of personal values that you share with your family or your more personal community. So for me, I try to live by what I call the 3 C's: compassion, courage, and curiosity every day. And I don't know that I achieve those every day. They are indeed aspirational, but at least I have something that's moving me forward, that's keeping me focused, that's giving me, those features, if you will, to move forward in life.
If the key to unlock that positive cycle of progression is self-awareness, can you do that without vulnerability? I think of the military and I think about your journey and I think about the pressure to be that perfect person. And yet it doesn't feel like there's any room to be vulnerable. But how could you be self-aware if you're not vulnerable?
I completely agree with you. I think that the essence of any kind of elite performance or elite team, the foundation, is being able to embrace this idea of vulnerability. We do a really good job on teams and in organizations, I think, of shining a light on superior performers or shining a light on best practices, which of course we should do and we need to do. But the flip side of that coin, again, has to be true. What does it mean as a team and as a human being to talk about failures, to talk about mistakes, to talk about when things didn't go according to plan, and to do it in a way that is positive and constructive, and forward moving. And so vulnerability is what allows us, I think, to do that as individuals, as teammates, and certainly, as leaders. And honestly, the only way to, strengthen that vulnerability muscle is to try it, is to literally put yourself out there. What stops us from being vulnerable? This feeling that will be perceived as weak, the feeling that will be perceived as maybe not as talented as a colleague, maybe the feeling that, people will perceive us as not all in. And I have found in my life that those are almost always figments of our own imagination. It's that fear of failure, the fear of being perceived as weak, that prevents us from being vulnerable. And I found across my career that the times that I allowed myself to be vulnerable, these kind of turning points in my career, were the times that got me, if you will, to that next level. And when you demonstrate vulnerability, I think the cool part is you're also empowering the people around you to do the same. And when you all of a sudden that culture of vulnerability starts to spread, then trust goes up. And with trust, you get loyalty. And I always say with loyalty, you'll get increased measures of performance out of the individual and out of the team.
Yes. It feels like a topic that isn't explored enough in leadership and passion and drive. But I find doing this podcast that one of the biggest surprises for me is that people like yourself and others who are at the who are on the journey of life, but at some point they were at the pinnacle of whatever it was, how vulnerable they are. I do want to get on to the mastery, the topic of mastery, because driving a car or flying a plane, or there are a few things in life, and I find this with cars, that if you do it really well, they're pretty preoccupying. You don't really think of much else because it requires a lot of concentration. Think about Formula One driver, or
Sure.
what you've done in a plane at the highest level of mastery of an aircraft. And I always am curious about this. What does it take to master being the very top of different kinds of things like cars or airplanes? So can you share with me and with the listeners, what are the surprising things that they wouldn't think of when it comes to mastery of being the top demonstration, the top capability of a fighter or pilot in the U.S. military? For example, one of the things I saw in doing research was visualization. You use visualization before a performance to deeply kind of, train your muscle memory about what you're going to go through. And I'm not sure people think about that when they think about what you've done in an airplane and mastering at the top. What are the other topics that may be surprising to people?
Well, I think, again, I think this idea of mastery is something that never has an end state, right? I think the first thing is going into something, whether it's an elite thing or not, realizing that there's always a way to continue to refine that and to continue to get better. So that's a mindset, right? That's a mindset you have to adopt and you have to fully embrace. I mean, you bring up this idea of what we call, you said visualization, we would call it chair flying.
Mm-hmm.
I would do that, go to bed doing that, laying in my bed with my eyes closed. I could go through an entire air show I could hear every radio call from the flight lead, every response on the radio that I would give him, every single position and movement of my body, where my hands would be on the throttle and the stick, the different airspeeds and the altitudes that I needed to see. And when we say we visualize, we're talking about doing that all the time, like even subconsciously. And it's funny because here I am nearly 20 years later, and I can still do the whole air show at night before I go to sleep. And I can still hear the radio calls from my teammates, because it turns into something with that immense focus, this idea of the commitment and the dedication to just repeat and practice and practice and practice over and over, tirelessly, indefatigably, until it does become muscle memory. And I like that you actually brought those topics up. This idea that the aircraft is an extension of my body. The aircraft is like one with me. That might sound a little bit maybe cheesy or something, but
it makes total sense to me.
Literally, I am the one making the aircraft do what it wants to do. And if you look at an air show with the Air Force Thunderbirds or the equally amazing Navy Blue Angels, you ask somebody on the ground, how many aircraft do you see up there? They'll tell you, I see 6 aircraft in that Delta formation. If you ask any Thunderbird or Blue Angels pilot, we'll tell you it's 1 aircraft. It's just 6 people coming together on 1 aircraft. We are all an extension of the flight lead, and where he and maybe someday she is leading the formation, the direction, the speed, and it's all this perfect alignment. And I think that the other thing that goes into this mastery is this focus on attention to detail. It's a lot of times people can say, well, that was good enough, or nobody noticed, or I was only 6 inches off, and it only needs to be 3 feet. And when you start kind of, equivocating between these little things, that's where mastery starts to fall off. That precision and that attention to detail and measuring surgically anything that you do, I think is vital, because that's where those small, steps of progression come.
How long would it take then for, let's say you've done it, you know exactly how it works, and how long would it take, do you think, for you to go to a performance and watch a performance, and the mastery of precision flying change or evolve in a way that couldn't be imagined today? Does that take like 10 years for an innovation to happen in mastery as one team? Or do you think it happens in kind of lumpy ways where it changes really quickly and then doesn't change for a while? How long do you think it'll be before you go to an air show and go, I had no idea that could ever be done?
Look, it was just last year. So I saw both the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels last year. Let's focus on what I know, the Air Force Thunderbirds. So here I am, nearly 20 years later, and the Thunderbird team has completely changed the way that they fly at 18 inches to 3 feet of spacing. Just even in the simple diamond formation, straight and level looks different. It looks closer. It looks more precise. They even upgraded the aircraft, so they have more powerful engines and all of that, and the F-16s they fly now. And so they're taking those extra aircraft capabilities and changing the air show. Right? I mean, now they do a 4-ship takeoff and can power straight into an overhead loop. We could have never done that in the Block 32s back in my day. And so when the team saw that it was given a new resource with new capabilities and skill sets, instead of just sitting on the same old air show and the same maneuvers, they said, aha, we've got some excess capability here. How can we change the air show to demonstrate that in a better way? And so just to watch the Thunderbirds today is a completely different air show. And I'm in awe every time that I see them.
Tied to that, I had a kind of question for you. I had the chance last year to go to Hickman Field in Hawaii and really understand, and I talked to some, and also Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, and talked to quite a few young pilots like you. And when I asked them more about what it took to support them, or what it takes to master, let's say, being ready to fight for our country, I was really impressed with the deep understanding and appreciation for how the whole team works together. For example, at Hickman Field, the importance of Guam and the importance of the tankers. And most Americans would never imagine that, our adversary in Asia is going to be halfway around the world. We really don't have any place there other than Guam. And the tankers give us the chance to master protecting our country. How do you think, as you've gone through the whole military experience of like organizations working together in really complex ways to master protecting our country?
Oh, absolutely. This idea of, what we call the joint force or everybody working together, lies at the heart of it. And doesn't that also lie at the heart of vulnerability? This idea that I'm a master of my craft and I have to put my ego aside and allow my teammates to be a master of their craft. How do I look at people cross-functionally and go, wow, I need to allow them to take as much pride in doing their job as you do. There's no way a fighter pilot can accomplish a combat mission without the tanker aircraft, without the crew chiefs on the ground, without the weapons load people doing all that. So we're raised from a very young age, I think, to have that appreciation. For example, on the Thunderbirds, we had 125 people during my time on 25 different career functions, who came together to make the mission happen. And
Yes.
if just one of us didn't do it to the highest expected standard of excellence, then that entire, elite mission would fall apart. So how you train together, how you socialize together, how you execute the mission together, is absolutely vital. And I think one of the most important things people can do when they join a new team, and the military taught me this, is take some time before you start flying that airplane to go turn wrenches with the crew chief under the jet, right? To learn about the logistics supply, chain, to learn about strategic communication from public affairs, or to learn about the budget from the finance experts. Doesn't mean you have to be able to do their job, but to understand exactly where you fit into, this highly interdependent puzzle, I think is vital to the type of high-level execution that we need to defend our nation, and is also vital to the vulnerability that you need to grow in yourself in order to trust that your teammates are going to do their thing. And that's how we all come in alignment,
Well,
I always reference the Thunderbirds, plus or minus 1 degree, plus or minus 1 to 2 knots of airspeed to make that happen.
I wanted to ask you a few questions or have just a discussion about some fun topics too about the Thunderbirds. And I guess the first one would be, I have the opportunity to race cars. I'm older guy, but I really enjoy it. It's a mastery thing for me, and for me at least, I get nervous before, but after I'm done, I've never been more relaxed. It's like going to the spa because your mind is so flushed. There's nothing left. And so one of the weird experiences for me, and what you did is like so many degrees more intense. So I have to ask you this question. When I go to Spa or Le Mans racing at 200 miles an hour in the rain, no lights, the lights, there's no street lights, crowned road, pretty dangerous stuff. Spray, can't see anything. And then I get done with the race and your mind adjusts. So everything changes. Your reference points changes. There's nothing dramatic about it. There are some times when you go, oh boy, but most of the time it's just like you're doing your job. And then you'll get in a car and drive to the hotel. And everything is so lazy and slow and ridiculously like non-performance that I've gotten tickets. I make all sorts of kinds of mistakes because it's just different. When you get out of that aircraft and you are the absolute top of your game, and you could argue maybe the top of what a human can physically do with a machine. What are some of the fun stories about you adjusting back to regular life that most of us would never have the experience, but you fighter pilots talk about?
Oh, when we talk about driving cars, people always want to know, are you an aggressive driver? Are you a fast driver? How do you drive? And it's funny because a lot of fighter pilots aren't necessarily the most aggressive, if you will, drivers. I think because we know too much. I will literally get in the center lane and set my cruise control, but it's because I'm nervous about the people around me and their training. Like there's a really nice,
and they're
happy
eating
place.
pizza and doing all sorts of crazy stuff in their cars.
Oh,
Yeah.
God forbid, I look over and they're texting. I think that all the time. I look at people and I drive by and they're texting and driving, and I will literally say out loud, like, I know a lot about speed and momentum and angles and closure, and I would never do that on the road.
Never.
Like I was trained in a much more elite, high-risk thing, and who are you you know, with your driver's license here in Colorado, thinking you can do that. So yeah, maybe I judge other drivers.
So, have you ever had a road trip that like changed you or changed your life? I drove across the country before I had my license, without my parents knowing about it in a car they didn't know I
Look at you.
owned. And I think I kind of went from a kid to an adult after that trip. It took me 2 days. I slept in my car, and I was kind of never the same after that. And I took a trip last year in my 28 Bentley, with my son through Colorado. We started in Colorado Springs and went through Gunnison, and you know, and
Amazing.
it's a car that you have to adjust everything yourself, and it goes 80 miles an hour, but it doesn't stop. So it takes a lot of concentration, and that road trip with my son totally changed our relationship. Have you ever had a road trip like that?
I'm so glad you brought this up because, I've had a couple events like that in my life, but the most recent was with my family, June, 2 summers ago. We took a almost 3 week long road trip around Colorado. We live here in Monument. And oftentimes we like to travel to other states and travel internationally as a family. And it occurred to me, Colorado is like arguably one of the greatest states in the United States as far as the ability to road trip and to see things and to be educated in the landscape. And so I thought, let's go on and let's do that. And so we loaded everybody and all of our, luggage up. We got my husband and I of 23 years. We've got now 14-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. And our dear friend Sarah came with us. And one of the things I told the kids was, why don't you guys plan the itinerary? Get together, plan the itinerary. And it was interesting to see Colorado through their eyes and like how intellectual they were. They were like, well, we studied, about the Ute Nation and the Native Americans. And so we want to go to Mesa Verde and to Ouray and to Telluride. And they did this big, just giant educational trip. If it is a monument, a memorial, a national park, a state
You've
park,
seen it.
I'm telling
Your
you,
family's seen it.
saw it.
Yeah.
I was just so proud of them. And it was the first time we traveled that they were in an age where there wasn't any complaining. They carried their own luggage.
Well, I think that's one of the natural laws of human beings. Once we invented the car, the road trip happened, and the road trip doesn't get talked enough. It's a common theme on Drive. We always talk about road trips, and everyone has a cool experience. I don't care how famous they are or what they've accomplished. It's like the great denominator. Everyone has had a road trip where they go. Hopefully,
There's all those little things you do on the road trip too, right? You open the sunroof and you feel the wind. You turn up the radio
yes,
and you're singing songs together. You
yes,
pull over at the really cheesy, weird, little stops. The world's giant rocking chair, or the largest ball of yarn, or these just kind of eclectic American things. And you get to pull over at every little truck stop and pick up your little snack or whatever it is. It's a really cool, fun bonding moment. I'm sorry. You got me
no,
smiling
I
here.
have to ask on that one, because you're such a high performance, always getting the most out of life. Who in your family controls the directions? Because I could imagine that is like a highly contested role in your family. Do you rotate it, or is there someone just naturally better, or you just say, that's what electronics are for? We're just going to
Well,
trust a nav system.
the kids came up with the overarching itinerary. They sit, in that middle bucket seat row. I did marry an Air Force navigator. So my husband, Paul, yeah, he was a weapons systems officer in the F-15E. I like to tell people I'm Maverick, he's Goose. So I'm always the driver, and he's always in the right seat navigating the whole time. So
Sounds like a very successful, effective partnership for
indeed, sir.
for a road trip. Yeah, no, my wife and I have not managed to define our roles that specifically. So there is a constant adjustment to the temperature. It's kind of like temperature wars.
I win the temperature wars.
And
It's 8 to 70, and that's it.
yeah, so we're going back on the temperature. Yes, we're going to, Gunnison, but there's like two different ways to get into the hotel, and so there's always optionality. So yeah, but I'm so jealous in a way. Like, so if you went tandem kayaking, it would work out, or tandem bicycling it would work out, because it's always really bad from our, in our
Yes,
family.
it generally does with my husband and I think it does go back to just our military training and what we did in the F-15E.
Well, so I don't have anything on my desk other than pictures of my family, but I do have one saying, which is from Plato, which says, "Be kind, because you never know if someone is carrying a burden."
Yeah.
And that was like how many thousands of years ago that he said that. What have you learned from your adversity about being kind to people? And especially in moments where you don't have to be kind.
Right, right. Just for, your listeners, I like to think that I was always a kind or a nice person. But then I went through my own just severe adversity. So I ended up being medically retired from the military for having a brain infection. So for 9 months, I couldn't walk, talk, read, or write. And for a year and a half, I went to therapy to learn to walk, talk, read, and write. So essentially lost a little over 2 years of my life. And in there, I lost my career, right? My identity as an Air Force officer, my profession as a fighter pilot, my means for providing for my family. And it was a really, really like low point to be broken down, to go from this really high performing elite fighter pilot to someone who is completely dependent on other people for, all of my activities of daily living, and to have, like, again, your entire identity stripped away from you, and it was through rebuilding myself. People say I'm resilient. I like to tell them I'm resurgent. Resilience is when you have a mistake or a failure, you bounce back, you get back in the jet the next day, or you get back in the office the next day. Sometimes life gives you these curveballs that you could have never expected or predicted. And it's a crucible, right? It fundamentally shapes and changes who you are. So I'm not resilient because there's no going back and bouncing back to who I was, because she's gone, right? I've kind of, through that, transformed into somebody who I think is a better version of myself. And I mentioned earlier that compassion is one of my personal values. And I learned compassion first by being compassionate to myself. During that horrible illness, during those dark times, during the difficulty of trying to reinvent myself. And it caused me, by going through that, to look at other people in a more compassionate way, because the quote you just said, you never know the burden that other people, are carrying. And so I look at the world and other people in a lot more compassionate way. And I think that's what makes me more patient in the Starbucks line, or more patient, when the red light turns green. So compassion is something I aspire to every single day.
Isn't that interesting and helpful? My brother has had a lot of medical adversity, and I don't think I've ever heard him complain once. And resurgence is a much better term than resilient. I totally agree with that. But I wonder if you ever said to yourself, "Why me?" And how did you process that? How did you make sense of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I said, why me? I was a full bird colonel working at the White House. My career was going great when all of this happened. I mean, when I say it was unexpected, it was out of nowhere. And so the why me absolutely happened. And here's the thing, right? That's okay. I think we have to allow ourselves these moments to grieve. Like, what happened to me was unfair, was unjust, it was terrible, right? There's no way to sugarcoat it. And I think it's a very human reaction to say, why me? I remember sitting on the couch, the day that my medical retirement came was 29 December 2017. And I was actually home alone. And it was an overwhelming feeling, right? I mean, I'd wanted to be a fighter pilot since I was 5. I put on the Civil Air Patrol uniform at age 12. I put on the Air Force uniform and took the oath at age 17. It was all I knew. So yeah, I'm asking why me. And I'm sitting there all alone. And it was just like a sad day, because look, I never had a retirement ceremony. To this day, that still bums me out. Nobody from the Air Force called that day. And in fact, half of my paperwork got mailed to me, like, thank you for your service. So there was actually, deeper feelings too, of a little bit of abandonment, sometimes even a sense of betrayal. And I'm just being, very raw and honest with you here.
Yes.
And as I sat there, realizing I have a lot of chronic symptoms from my brain injury that I still live with today that impact my daily life, I was sitting there thinking, well, all these things I can't do. I can't do this. I can't do that. Who's going to hire me? What am I going to do? Who am I if I'm not wearing my nation's uniform? Who am I if I'm not wearing my plane or flying a plane? And as I sat there, clear as day, Jim, these words came to my mind. And the words were, yield to overcome. Yield to overcome. And in that moment, what that meant to me, it wasn't about quitting or surrendering or giving up. It was about full acceptance. It's not about why me. What happened, happened. I didn't ask to get bit by a tick and get a brain infection from a tick bite. I didn't ask to go misdiagnosed for as long as I did by medicine. I didn't ask, to have a chronic illness and to have to completely, reinvent myself. But the real question in that moment of yield to overcome is about acceptance. What is it that I can do right now with where I'm at to move forward? And that mindset shift, every time I come across these frustrating moments in life where I didn't get what I want or I didn't succeed, I tell myself, yield to overcome. And that has kind of just become a little bit of a life mantra. And as an aviator, I like to think of it this way. I always tell people the runway behind you is always unusable. All you ever have is the runway that's in front of you. And that's kind of the mindset that got me through my why me phase.
Yeah, I look at my brother. Turns out that my sister became an orthopedic surgeon because of him. I think I'm a much more compassionate CEO because of him than I would have been without him in my life. I always stop and pay attention to people like him. Everyone in my family was changed because he was the way he is. My closest friend, Wayne Rainey, he's 3-time world champion MotoGP motorcycle rider. He had an accident and he's paralyzed from the chest down. And Wayne has helped my kids understand more about life than anyone that they have ever met. Because I had never thought about it the way you just said it, yield to overcome. But I think in both cases, they were able to accept their circumstances and do great and have great impact on others and themselves that they couldn't have even predicted before adversity. And what is and where are you now? Where does that leave you now as a mom and a professional and sharing your experiences? Like, what is that total that resurgence feels like to you right now at this moment?
It feels very freeing, like the weight of the world is off of my shoulder. I think back to my old self and how much I tried to please other people and say yes to everything. And I think one of the most beautiful things that came out of this is I have clarity, deep clarity on what actually matters in life and what doesn't. That allows me to say no to things as equal as I say yes to things. Your story that you just shared really, really touches me. I mean, it's really beautiful because I see the same in my family. From the ages of 5 to 7, I was bedridden. My kids some days I couldn't even talk. My husband overnight became my caregiver and a single dad to elementary school age twins, essentially. And I look at my family and how much that was shaped, right? My kids are more compassionate because of it. They know what a good marriage looks like, right? What it means to live those values and those vows, because I guarantee you my husband has lived the in sickness and in health one more times than, I can count. And they learned about self-advocacy, and so the idea that our family can live by that value of compassion and lead that way, it's more than just me. It extends to all of us. And, I reinvented myself as someone who does leadership consulting and professional speaking. And it's a lot of fun because, let me back up. People always say, Nicole, I'm so sorry you can't fly anymore because of my brain injury. I can't pass an FAA medical exam. I can't pilot a plane. I always tell them it's not the flying that I miss. What I miss is being a part of a team. What I miss is leading airmen. And by being a consultant and a speaker, very selfishly, like I'm filling that hole in my heart. I get to be a part of Ford for a day. I get to go help this bank, or I get to go help that hospital system, grow their culture. And arguably, I think I could make the case that I impact more people now on a grander scale more quickly than if I had ever stayed in the Air Force. That bite changed my life and my family's life for the better.
Yes. So I think that's a perfect lead into I'm the CEO of Ford, and I'd love to hear from you what suggestion you have or what advice you'd give me, because you have such a unique and positive perspective. And this company is going through more change than we've ever had in 120 years, arguably even more than the Model T. And I'd love to hear your suggestions or advice.
Absolutely. Well, I always tell people change is a team sport. It's absolutely a team sport. And the most important thing is to make sure that every team member across all levels, of an organization, are in alignment, on what matters. And so, as I look at Ford, you have this cool purpose statement about every person being free to move and pursue their dreams. That's something that can unite in, you have this global company with thousands upon thousands of employees, but it's a uniting statement.
So this idea of alignment around accountability towards, excellence at whatever that is, has been a huge journey for our team. But efficiency and competing with the Chinese electric vehicle companies, for example, requires absolutely the best talent working the most efficiently on the biggest problems we've ever faced and solved. And that's so exciting. We have the right value system in the company, filled with people on a complete mission to change the world, as Ford always has. $5 a day wage, so many things we've done for our country. But the alignment part on performance and excellence is a journey. So I appreciate you encouraging me to think about that and have everyone at Ford think about that.
And this is where I like to remind people, you said it is a journey. And a lot of times people think, well, we have a set of values or these are the set priorities. And in their mind, they're set. And I like to tell people that they don't have to be set. These value statements or these ways you hold each other accountable are living, breathing things that should evolve over time, that can be adapted over time, that should change. Maybe priorities should change. Maybe we should add a value, take away a value, add a priority, move one down the list, and that's where you getting out and having these conversations, meeting that guy who's creating tomorrow right there at Ford gives you an idea that maybe there's something that can shift in the culture that can empower, more of this. So that
we've perfected designing and building these complicated internal combustion engines like the F-150 or your Expedition. We make an F-150 every 53 seconds.
Wow.
But after 120 years, we're also sometimes not competitive in moving faster, in being more efficient, in having breakthroughs that are not incremental. And so I agree with you 100% that sometimes we have to make an audible and change the rules, change our objectives, and that's what's required sometimes of leaders and our team. And so far it's gone really well. Well, I so appreciate that, and I am so thankful for having the opportunity just to spend this time with you, and I know the people listening to Drive will appreciate that too. Thank you for everything you've done for our country, and if there's any issue with that Expedition, you're going to have to call me individually, and I'll be there with my wrenches. I remember at Nellis, I asked the commander of the whole group there, what makes our military different than other militaries? And he said, and it was like a 30-minute delay to answer. He goes, I'll answer that later. So we went out to the flight line. There was an F-22, and we were approaching it. He said, Jim, I want to answer your question. And we're walking out, and there's this young aviator, and it was a she, actually, I think.
Awesome.
And I was expecting him to say, it's this person, because not knowing much about your business or what you did, there's kind of a myth about, like you said, about just the pilot and nothing else. Mm-hmm. And he walked right by we said politely, said hello to the aviator, and we went right past that, and he pointed to the name on the side of the aircraft. He said, we're the only military that put the people, the the team that make this plane work, including the aviator. In the air, we put their name on the side of the airplane. That's what makes us better.
There's ownership, there's accountability, there's pride, there's attention to detail. And, what's important about those names is, as a pilot, is not only the aviator name and maybe my Wizzo or my backseater's name, but, it's got the dedicated crew chief and the assistant crew chief. This idea that we're all in it together, and this plane doesn't fly and execute its mission without all of us. Yeah, it's a very good symbolic and visual reminder of the power of teamwork.
I never forgot that.
That's awesome. What a great
so
story.
powerful.
I'm glad you had that experience. I'm glad you had
I did.
that.
I wish everyone in America who pays taxes had that experience. They would understand how amazing people like you are, and how incredible the focus on excellence is in our military. Thanks so much. And again, I am so jealous of the way your husband and you work on a road trip. That is like the gold standard now that I will talk to my wife tonight about and see if we can manage to do something that specific with such great job descriptions.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It was a joy to join you, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All the very best. Bless you.